fast forward to 2023 and people would say, oh yeah, my mom just got a cyber. Yeah, she just got a phase one. It's great. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, my cousin got one too. Yeah, everyone understands now what it is and they're involved. And I think that's such an important thing to have.
Welcome to the Start of Defense. My name is Callye Keen. Today we have Zach Walker. Zach, you've been an assistant director for operations cyber innovation at the Air Force, but now you are the managing partner of ATX Defense. And I see you posting information on CMMC, which is kind of the boogeyman of the DIB right now. So I really want to reach in and talk to you about that, get your perspective on this. Before we dive in, what are you passionate about right now?
That's a tough one. Well, first off, Callye, thanks so much for having me. Like I was saying earlier, fan of the show. You really enjoyed listening to some of my former colleagues wax poetic about defense and national security. I know it may sound easy or trite, but I'm really passionate about national security. It's a field I've been involved in since I turned 18, joined the Army after the 9/11 attacks. And I've just always found myself drawn to the mission of it. And now I'm doing it, as you suggested, owning a company. I'm trying it on the private sector side, which is different. It's certainly got its benefits and drawbacks, but whether as an 18-year-old enlisting in the Army National Guard or my time in the intelligence agencies or Defense Innovation Unit, I've always found myself drawn to doing something that has some kind of an impact on national security. Or maybe you could say I just can't hold down a job and I just like doing lots of different things. I'd say that's what I'm passionate about. So I figured this would be a good place to talk about it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I think we both share that love of national security and defense. I mean, it's really what I've spent the majority of my life doing outside of doing some fun things, designing a hair tool, working with startups, doing this and this and this. But this is what my family's always done. We've been in defense manufacturing for more than 80 years. So it's kind of like grew up doing this thing and I've seen this evolve from a very literal mom and pop, our business being mom and pop business, to a sophisticated business. And I've seen the market, so the defense industrial base, the DIB, go from literally just thousands and thousands of these very small shops, larger contract manufacturers. I've seen it go from that to a very sophisticated market with $1 million equipment and complex IT systems. And it's kind of teeing up this change where I might be a little bit more pessimistic because I'm inside this bubble. As the CMMC change, I feel like it's very necessary because a lot of the equipment that's out there, a lot of the way that information is being passed around is ludicrously insecure. And people are working on very sensitive projects, but right down to the component or the equipment that's making the components is like very insecure from a national security perspective. But it's also like, it's not the vector of sophistication that people have. Somebody might be running $1 million piece of equipment and have decades of experience in making aerospace components, but cybersecurity is not really on their radar. I kind of wanted to walk through this with you about CMMC, your perspective on cybersecurity in supply chain or just smaller businesses.
Yeah, that'd be great. CMMC it's really interesting because it's where national security and the defense industrial base, cybersecurity, just so many things intersect. And like you were saying, these very small companies that are maybe 8 or 9 tiers down from a major defense supplier, their J-20 fighter looks like the F-22. It's not a coincidence. It's not because they're a huge fan of the U.S. Air Force, although I can't blame them. It's because it's been so easy to pilfer this sensitive information. It's not classified information. It's called controlled and classified information. It's something as a Govy, as I've spent 20 plus years as a reservist and amount of time on active duty. As a government employee, you don't really think about it because everything's kind of, allegedly protected, not really, but it's all a secure network, allegedly. And there's just no consequences. There's no consequences for mishandling controlled and classified information or even information that isn't public, but isn't controlled, called like federal contract information that companies deal with, which is something I just had no concept of as a Govy, right? Oh, this information that companies make that isn't controlled, but it's also not public. They still need to protect it. And so that's the challenge that we're in now is this data has been taken from us for so long, for decades at this point. The DoD is finally doing something about it, and that's called CMMC. It's everyone's favorite 4-letter word in DoD, because what happens is that companies like myself, I got in this, I promise you, I never, ever thought I would be into compliance. It's like literally the last thing I wanted to do. And I still hate compliance, but it's so important, again, because of national security. This is happening. And it's really a very interesting time because the DoD is going to implement this, and whether companies are ready or they're not. And there may be some final things that DoD has to tie up when it comes to timing and implementation. But if a company has a DoD contract, they are going to have to be compliant to some level of CMMC. For fun, got a quote from one of the big companies that does this work. They quoted from a 5-person company. They said it would be $200,000 to get us compliant for the first year, and then $100,000 a year thereafter, which is absolutely insane. And I now realize it doesn't have to be like that, but that's what companies are being told. And so one of a few things will happen. One, they'll pay these consultants like a king's ransom and get them up to compliance levels. And I guess, that works on a business perspective. But my real fear here is that the companies that we're talking about, like the little mom and pops, that maybe they do make this little widget that goes on a plane and they bring in $500,000 a year from the government in order to do that. They might say, you know what? I don't think that's worth it anymore. I don't think I want to get in this business, and I don't want to have to, update my Windows 95 machines to whatever it is now. And they'll exit the market, or they'll get sold to private equity, or there'll be even more consolidation as they get rolled into larger and larger defense primes, which raises the price for everyone. Or what my real fear is, having come from the Defense Innovation Unit previous to starting my company, at DIU, we spent the better part of a decade trying to coax dual-use, venture-backed, high-growth companies to work with the Department of Defense. And we had all these amazing mechanisms for them to do so with other transaction authority and things like that. We spent so much time and effort getting these companies to finally start working with DoD and providing really valuable dual-use technology. And now my fear is that we're going to scare some of them away with CMMC because it is so ambiguous, it is so expensive, and frankly, it's extremely difficult for a company who doesn't do defense as its primary business to meet and be compliant and still win DoD work. So that's how I got into compliance after never thinking I would do it.
I'm going to share some opinions, then I want to jump back to the balance between innovation and compliance, because in this industry, it's really, those two things have to be metered together, right? But one, we've already seen massive exodus and consolidation in defense industrial base because one, there's been some budgetary issues which cause problems for smaller suppliers. They can't weather inconsistencies in the market very easily. That's come over time, but predominantly is an aged out industry, right? So the entire military, 90% of those parts, those machine parts, are done by very small businesses that are owner operated. And those owners are just exiting. And if you have a small job shop or contract manufacturing business, you're not going to really sell it in the same sense you sell like a software company that is intellectual property. If you have contracts, you could sell, and I think there are more smarter PEs to your point that are rolling up these companies and they're interested in doing that. But predominantly they just close their doors, right? They don't have your sons or daughters that want to run the company, and they just close their doors and say, I had a nice life, I made decent money, I'm going to go retire at this lake and hang out with my wife, and that's that. And so we're seeing this massive, very quick shrinking of the DIB. There's a startup, Hadrian, which has gotten a lot of attention. They got significant investment recently, something to the tune of $70 or $90 million. They're essentially a machine shop. It sounds very fancy, but they're a more automated machine shop to solve this problem. By starting from scratch, they can kind of bake in things like CMMC controls, because right now, all of defense manufacturing is a dual-use supply chain. All the companies that make those parts, they do many different things, and it doesn't afford their business model to do just defense in general. Kform is 99% defense. It's because of this issue, so we just don't do other things. Most other companies that are just, smaller contract manufacturers, they're part of a dual-use supply chain, which is not a concept that's commonly talked about, but they make commercial products, automotive products, maybe if they're very technical, but generally they just make stuff for startups or innovators for the local ecosystem. They might repair parts. They just do all kinds of things. And so not all of that has the burden of CMMC or FAR compliance or physical security requirements or what have you. And by making compliance more important than innovation, what's going to happen is you're going to have a sole purpose supply chain, which I feel like long-term is going to be weaker because it'll be only able to focus on aerospace, defense, and space. Like that'll be it. You can't have a company that does a lot of different things anymore because of the way the compliance works. So I'm kind of scared for that. I'm very interested in secure supply chain in general for electronics, for manufacturing, but for just general knowledge work, the software bill of materials, or you think of knowledge bill of materials, like where do these ideas come from? Where are they going? Like, what do I need to pack together to implement something? I think that dual use has gotten very popular, but we're not really thinking about, well, they come from dual use sources as well. They don't come from singular sources. You have a really broad set of experiences from being in the Army, being at DIU, and now being founders. So I kind of wanted to get, what do you think of that concept of dual use supply, not just dual use as far as that endpoint, but the whole generation of an idea or knowledge?
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting question that you bring up. And it's addressed when it comes to all the compliance rules as well, because at some point, obviously ideas aren't considered controlled information, but when you get schematics or processes that are put in place that are sensitive, that's when things get very confusing. And from what I've found talking to other companies, they have a hard time knowing when that line stops and the line of information that has to be safeguarded and controlled starts. And it can be difficult to know. And there certainly are some different criteria that companies use, but it's not just, mentioning the hardware companies, which I think really are the classic suppliers of the defense industrial base. And, again, talking about the mom and pop shop that's 7 or 8 layers removed from the defense prime making, hardware parts. But even my company, right, ATX Defense, we're primarily a management consultancy. We're helping the Army build software development organization in Austin, Texas, right? We're subject to all of this as well. All of the cyber companies, right? Even if it's, whether it's hardware, it's software, it's ideas, if these companies have contracts that have a very specific clause, it says that they have to protect controlled and classified information, then their entire system has to be compliant with this regime. It's these 110 controls, 320 objectives. And there's ways to do it that are manageable, again, that aren't $250,000. But it's certainly not easy. And I think it gets to your point of how many of these companies will say either, yeah, it's time to hang it up, it's been a good career, time to go live on the beach somewhere. Or again, my biggest fear, the companies that are finally entrants into this market, whereas now they have a good commercial revenue stream, but government is something they've slowly started to build, whether it's from a CIBR or a CSO or some other mechanism. And they'll just look at it and say, we're not going to do this. It's not worth it. It's not worth it anymore. The sales cycles are slow, right? We love our country, but if our country's going to make us follow this insane compliance regime, I can't break down my company with it. That's my fear. That's why I want to come on the show and try to perhaps demystify CMMC a little bit, because it doesn't have to be a doomsday scenario. And maybe I should start with this, right?
Yeah, let's talk about this, because quite literally, people are looking at SBIR opportunities or other funding vehicles. And we love talking about government-led, non-dilutive funding vehicles for ideas. Like, I love it. I think that it is such a great source for innovators to enter this market. But if you think I'm going to get $180,000 out of the Air Force, or I'm going to get $250,000 out of NSF grant, or what have you, you're looking at a different SBIR or an innovation challenge vehicle, and then you realize, hey, I just got a quote for $200K to be CMMC compliant, but I'm only going to get 180 out of the Air Force. Like, I'm going to be underwater right off the get. So I don't want to enter this market. And it doesn't have to be like that. So I'd love to jump into that.
Absolutely. No. And that's an excellent point. I think that's a great example. A company that gets a phase 1 CIBR, which 75K, whatever it is, they won't necessarily have to meet all of the requirements at that moment. But then if they want a phase 2, they want to get the larger money. Not in every situation, but in many times they will have to meet those requirements for controlled and classified information, which again, it's a lot. So what's a company to do? Honestly, again, it also sounds a little trite, but a company just has to do what's in its best business interest. And they have to do their own research and try to understand what it actually means, because the rules are onerous, but again, they're there for a good reason. Like we were saying earlier, the Chinese J-20 looks just like an F-22 because they're really good at getting this information from us. With the advent of cloud technology and more modern collaboration and secure tools that are out there, there are ways to offload a lot of the risk onto commercial cloud providers with some safeguards. You don't have to completely change everything you do. For a lot of companies, what they'll do, there's something called an enclave, where they'll just say, okay, we'll have a new email domain, it's secure.atxdefense.com. And whenever we email the government, we will do it on that email address. We will only access it from certain devices in a certain place. And then that's how we'll do CMMC. right? Because if you're a company like mine, it's primarily knowledge work or consulting or ideas. You're not writing source code. You're not making hardware. That's a really good solution, is to be able to kind of partition that so you can focus on your commercial work and you don't have to worry about, you're saying, spending all of your civil war just getting compliant. Just companies need to know that they can do that and do that research to understand that, again, you never have to pay a consultant $250,000 to get yourself compliant. Now, if you are writing source code, like a company I'm working with does, they're making hardware, they're writing source code, right? They're in it. And so source code, is that protected? Well, if it's under a contract, source code is considered to be critical technical information. I mean, it really is kind of, as you can imagine, like the bread and butter of something that an adversary would want to take. So unfortunately, that is something that would have to be protected. But again, there's ways to do it. There's ways to mitigate that, to partition it out from the regular business operations. If you're going to be 100% or 95% or 99% in your case, DoD focused company, you are going to most likely have to just suck it up and figure it out and find a way to implement it in a way that doesn't destroy your company. And that's the other part. As I was doing this initial research, it's just hard to find information. It's almost like an information asymmetry thing. I don't think it's intentional. I really don't. I don't think the DoD intentionally said, let's just put out a lot of vague information and then let companies just completely freak out. I don't think that was the case, although that may be how it's come out, right? There are ways that companies can look at this and kind of come up with a plan to do it in a way that makes financial sense for them. But it's not easy, and it will change. That's the other part too, is everything I'm saying right now could change before what's called final rulemaking goes into effect. That's the other weird part here. Some companies are already undergoing assessment. They're getting something called it's called SPRS, so Supplier Performance Risk System Score. They're getting their scores, they're putting them in DoD systems, but CMMC isn't technically official yet. So if anyone ever tells you, as of October 10th, 2023, that CMMC is an official final thing, then they are lying to you. It's close to being done. The best guess is that likely sometime early fiscal year 25, it will be required, and it will be required in order to win contracts from DoD. But that's a year away. And it very likely could take a year for many companies, if they are going to do a full conversion into CMMC compliance, to get ready for that time. What's funny about this is that all of these rules have actually been around since 2017. So there's this thing is known as 7012. So I think it's DFARS 252.254-7012. Again, something I never thought I would know or want to know in life before this. But the 7012 essentially says, effective 2017, if you handle controlled and classified information or cover defense information, right, source code, specifications, right, all the things that the Chinese and Russians want to take from you. If you have that, you have to meet all these rules and controls, like all the CMMC stuff. You were supposed to have done that starting in 2017, but it was self-attested. Companies could pinky swear, no, I totally did that. Yeah, got perfect score. I've read that 75% of companies did self-attest that they had perfect scores. And when they were checked, basically 0% of companies were accurate in that, right? Again, not claiming some kind of big conspiracy, but it's confusing. And when you go to a website and they say, put in your score, if there's no accountability and you don't really know what it is, you just say, yeah, I got a perfect score, it's fine. But the reality is, what's behind it is something that's very complicated and very serious. So CMMC is just a way to take the rules that already exist and find a way for DoD to enforce them, because self-attestation is just simply not working, and it hasn't been, and it never will. That's not how business works in America. You're going to have to trust and verify in this situation. So probably within the next year, it'll happen. Again, the rules still to be fully determined. There's a chance things could get delayed or changed, but I would say sometime starting in fiscal year 2025, it's very likely that companies will have to show that they meet all of those CMMC controls. There's 110 controls, 320 objectives as of today, which again could change. They have to show that they meet those in order to win contracts that have controlled and classified information in them. And if you're a subcontractor, the prime contractor will have to validate you, and you'll also have to get usually a third-party assessment, a company like mine that comes in and charges you. It's not a charity, right? It's a very expensive proposition, but have a company that comes in that does a formal third-party assessment and then determines if the score is what you say it is. So it's a lot. It really is. I like to say there is a light at the end of the tunnel with all this, but that light is a train coming very quickly with lots of rules and regulations, and companies just need to be aware of it. That's really it. Certainly not not the time to try to scare people. And I hate the tactics that some companies use to try to scare others. They bring up things about the False Claims Act, which there have been some stories in the news. Companies that have falsely attested to being compliant and then it later been found out that they're not, and then they get in pretty big trouble. Yes, it's not about scaring companies, right? Again, we don't want these companies to leave the defense industrial base, especially for these dual use companies that maybe have only started working with DoD in the last 5 years because of all the defense innovation activities. We have to retain these companies in the DID. It's too important for national security not to. But CMMC is something that they're going to have to understand. But do the research, talk to someone. Don't take the first quote or information that the company may give you, right? You have to watch out for yourselves. But just understand it will be difficult, but it doesn't have to be the reason that you leave the defense space.
If you're a sub, you've already been forced by primes to start this process, right? This is the other interesting thing is like, we've been on this road for a really long time, and there was really no service providers around 800, 171, now CMMC at that time. And then they'd say, hey, it's not required until later. I'm like, well, if you work for one of the large aerospace primes, like they require it if you want to get work from them because they want to make sure that their supply base is ahead of the contracts. It's very interesting from the small business perspective is they had to become early adopters in the space because if Boeing's going to win an award next year or the year after that is going to require CMMC, they want to be able to turn around and release it to their consolidated supply base that is already compliant. They've been doing this for the last year and a half or 2 years, like with pretty strong effort. All of the larger primes, that's already forced an interesting conversation and consolidation from peers, friends of mine to say like, how do I do this? How do I do that? And come up with different flavors. For some people, it's very simple. It's just use a tool. So like you say, build an enclave, get another domain. There's some pretty approachable tools for that. But a lot of people, it's been like, change everything, change your whole infrastructure, change your whole business, how the whole business works. And so they've had to make that choice. So to me, it's part of a broader conversation is I'm interested in making cool stuff. That's all I want to do. I want to work on interesting things with interesting people that I like, work on things that I like. And I really enjoy making advanced electronics for national defense. I think it gets to flex a lot of, mental muscles. I feel like it's mission centric. I like doing it. So I'm going to put things in that bucket. And I want to move fast. I want to move fast like a startup. I want to see an opportunity or talk to an operator. I want to talk to somebody that's active duty and they say, I wish this existed and I want to come back and I want to make it and get it in their hands. And that's a lot of what DIU has been fostering, that kind of commercial speed into the market and push through other programs and really change how investment is happening. Like we talked about, David being on the show and the tides shifting in Silicon Valley of investment. And so we think of Silicon Valley speed, attacking a problem and getting things lean into somebody's hands, but then balancing that with, okay, well, let's do it in a controlled, secure manner. I think that puts us in an interesting space. Maybe this is a good way, and this is a big shift in the conversation, but I saw what you're doing with Army with a software factory, and I don't know enough about that. I do understand the concept of software factory, and we've talked to lots of AAL people on the show and a lot of people around Army Innovation Future Command. So it's just a really interesting idea. And I think it runs into a similar problem. It's like we want to move fast and do interesting things, but we also want to do it in a mission-centric, safe, secure way. I wanted to tee up so I could learn a little bit more about the software factory, what you can share and what makes sense to share. How does that play into this concept of security and innovation meeting in the middle?
Yeah, Austin has had such an amazing run of defense innovation organizations in the last half decade, starting with DIUX, formerly now Defense Innovation Unit in 2016 when I got involved, followed by Air Force AFWorks and of course Army Futures Command and National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, National Security Innovation Network, Army Applications Lab, came along with AFC. It's just amazing. It's amazing. We joked that we could have these kind of joint interagency meetings because, of course, the Bureau comes and some others. Meetings would take a month to schedule in DC. We could have just hanging around, having coffee in Austin. It was a really kind of magical place to be in this space, especially, honestly, pre-COVID, right? Especially because before COVID hit, the DoD was absolutely certain it was possible to work from anywhere aside from DoD buildings until sometime in March 2020 when they suddenly realized, actually, you could do that, work from home, no problem. Here's some tools to let you do it. But before COVID, bringing someone from the Pentagon to downtown Austin, it would blow their mind, right? They would see you were on the 16th floor of a building. We see this beautiful view of downtown. There's like kombucha on tap, and they just couldn't understand how you could work in a place like this and still get work done and still do important national security and defense related work. And that really was the magic of Austin. COVID certainly hurt in that sense of no travel for a long time. And then DoD kind of got it like, oh yeah, we can actually work in places that aren't dark windowless rooms where dreams go to die, where I've spent a lot of my time in my career, which overall is good, right? It's very good for the federal workforce. But that was definitely something that we had going for us in Austin. And it's still an amazing place. So you mentioned Army Software Factory, Army Applications Lab, Army Futures Command itself, right? A 4-star that generally just kind of walks around Austin in a polo shirt out of a university building. It's just extremely weird. And that's what we're all about in Austin is weird. So it fits in really well. Army Software Factory, there's a lot of information about it online. To me, what's so special about it, being in the reserves and coming from the Defense Innovation Unit, they have made good on that promise of empowering soldiers, service members to be part of the solution. And that is just so hard to do. Look at something like what the Air Force did with their Kessel Run, which started off as a DIU prototype effort. It's very much about the technology and the tools delivered and the program that was being supported. And certainly Kessel Run has done some amazing things, and it's amazing organization. First commander was an amazing human, former DIUXer. But fast forward 6 years, and there's not really a institutionalization of software development in the Air Force, right? There's a couple dozen software organizations. I'm a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force in the Air National Guard now. Right? There's not a path for someone like me, even if I were more junior in rank, a path for me to become a software developer and have a career in software development. That's something that's really unfortunate. I think it's something that just broadly emerging technology, or just even getting back to even the CMMC conversation, just emerging technology in general in the Department of Defense is something that we can be really good at acquiring or sometimes integrating into programs of record. But when it comes to institutionalizing and actually empowering service members to do that work and do the implementation, we have a really, really hard time with that. I mean, look at cybersecurity. I spent about a decade at NSA and CIA in the cyber realm. It really wasn't until the mid-2020s, I think 2016 is when I think the Army really revamped their cyber career fields. I know the Air Force was way ahead back in 2008 timeframe. But even 2008, I mean, that was 20 years after China was exfiltrating all of these plans and data from people's desktops, right? It's very slow to adapt. And I think we've seen that in all of these emerging technologies, right? Right now, software is that thing that is starting to be institutionalized. Of course, no podcast about defense would be complete without someone saying the words artificial intelligence. So glad I got that one out there. We can check that box. What if there were service members that were using operationalizing artificial intelligence? Just think all the people at companies, obviously not mine, of course, but others that are using ChatGPT and other kind of tools that make their jobs easier. That was the promise of artificial intelligence, at least when I was at the Pentagon. It's not to replace humans necessarily, it's to make them better at their jobs and more efficient. And I think that's what's so cool about things like these LLMs that make someone just that much more effective, especially as consultants. Again, until they're filing legal briefs with fake info, but just the way it should work, where it makes someone more efficient, more productive. What if we had platoons or squadrons in the service that had people focused on operationalizing artificial intelligence in that way? We just don't. And I think we will. I think it might be like 2035 or 2040, and it'll be a really good idea then. It's just very slow. So long answer to a very simple question, but I'm just very proud to be involved with that organization just to see what they've done to help bring that power down to the lowest levels of the service. And I hope all the other services are paying attention and follow suit.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I'm very bullish on the DoD and IC's ability to engage industry and just seeing that really speed up in the last, I'd say 3 to 5 years, right? I think realistically, just, seeing that down to my mortal everyday person level, my ability to go and speak to a group of people and actually ask them what they want and then get informed of different funding vehicles or opportunities that are out there and just applying to them. It's really been different from 10 or 15 years ago, where the whole industry was a little bit more opaque and it just was nothing like that, at least from my perspective or my knowledge as a small business person or just a product development person, certainly not from the commercial startup world. So seeing that mix and then now every time I go speak someplace, so yeah, we'll say AI, right, is a great example of this, is like we're taking commercial tools that are out there, and then there's a lot of security questions that are associated with those. So if I want to use Azure and I want to bring Azure to Tactical Edge, like what am I actually bringing? I think there's a growing awareness that ChatGPT is not secure, that it's remembering the things that you're putting in there and that you shouldn't post a lot, but people are still doing that and doing it at a kind of an alarming level. And I think as the AI tools proliferate more, or let's say more sophisticated interactive tools proliferate more, we'll have to have new types of security, not CMMC, but new types of security that just say like, what is actually inside of this model? Like what's actually going on here and how is it making these determinations? And is it making these determinations in a way that is secure? So is it learning in a way that's secure so I can understand what's happening with my data? Like how is it being stored? How is it additionally being shared? Is it telling me that something is impossible, but that's because I don't have a security level? Is that giving me side channel information about is that in and of itself like a weak signal that should be paying attention to? Like, is that information in and of itself? There's all these compounding questions like, as DoD reaches more into the commercial world and comes at commercial speed. And like, we want to use these same kind of tools. The joke that I make is like, I show people the same things that 14 to 15-year-old nerds do on the weekends. I'm like, this is like what a kid would use. And this is a cool thing that you can build with this little hacking RF tool. Here's what you can do with a Flipper Zero. And it like blows their mind. It's like a pocket EW tool. So we want to take those kind of ideas and move them in, but we have to be really careful about taking those ideas and like moving them in at speed, but also securely. And software is the ultimate version of that because it's like a black box, right? What's going on inside that software? I think this is a really interesting conversation.
I couldn't agree more. I think that is one good thing that will come out of our new focus on CMMC and software build materials and everything else. I think we will be forced to get a better understanding of where our data is going and how it's being secured or not secured. And I think DoD will be better for it. I also think that the policy side of things and some of the culture side will still need to catch up a bit. I agree with you that it's been phenomenal to see the last half decade just how different the relationship is between like a particular dual use startups and the Department of Defense. When I first started doing this in 2016 in DIUX, people would say like, how are you in Austin? How are you an officer in the Air Force in like regular clothes doing this work? And then fast forward to 2023 and people would say, oh yeah, my mom just got a SIBR. Yeah, she just got a phase 1. It's great. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, my cousin got one too. Yeah, everyone understands now what it is and they're involved. And I think that's such an important thing to have. Again, we've talked a lot about doom and gloom, shrinking the defense industrial base, but I think finding new ways to extend it, bringing newer entrants into it, that'll be one of the best things that we can do. We're just on the culture side, the policy side, I think DoD still has a little bit of catching up to do. One of my favorite stories from my time in DIUX, so 2017, I was working on a project that was grown out of the DARPA Cyber Grand Challenge to try to use a very basic artificial intelligence, more machine reasoning, to find vulnerabilities in software and exploit them and patch them. It was really, really cool project. And I remember we were looking to put companies on contract and I was talking to someone that was a Govy, old school, longtime Govy. And the dream was that someday this could be done for aircraft software, that you could look at aircraft software, try to find vulnerabilities, patch them kind of on the fly. And again, in the last half decade, there's been many attempts to do that in different levels of success. But I'll never forget what that person said to me. He said, I don't think you'll ever be allowed to do that. They will never let you do that because there is no rule that lets you do that. And I was like, okay, there's probably no rule about how to handle atomic weapons in the 1920s, but kind of figured it out, right? It just, the idea that there has to be a rule for emerging technology that has yet to exist. It's just something that stuck with me over the last 6 years. And again, I think that's the beauty of this dual use startup ecosystem, right? Because these companies, these entrepreneurs are going to come to the DoD over and over again with all of these things of, well, you've never done this before. Try this, try that, try that. We do this in the industry. We do that, we do that. And DoD, again, slowly is starting to realize we can do some of these things. We can assume some of this risk. And those people that say you can only do things that are explicitly in the rules, hopefully are slowly starting to retire out. But it is exciting. And I love doing it, whether it's been from the government side, whether it's from the industry side. Government is really that thing that we all can do together, that all of us have some kind of connection to, some kind of responsibility for. And so, it's something that we can make fun of sometimes, and it's a little bit frustrating, but at the end of the day, it's just so important that we all do this together and that we get the right people and smart people and people that care involved in this space in some capacity to contribute to national security, even if that means meeting CMMC.
Zach, that's a wonderful place to end this conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Callye. Yeah, I really enjoyed listening to him. Loved to listen to David talk about venture capital. If listeners haven't listened to that one, go check it out. Way better than me. David Ross said, ladies and gentlemen.
It is a great episode. So thanks for the shout out and thank you for listening. This has been the Startup Defense.